George Andrews Tin Man, trail name, Anti-Gravity Gear, and I'm going to show you the Tin Man stove. This is the stove. It's called a Pepsi can type stove. Weighs 4/10 of an ounce, and it is a pretty powerful stove, as you will see. This is a primer pan that's used. This comes from Trail Designs, and this really is a good accessory to have for any Pepsi can type of stove. And put in 1 ounce of fuel. And then if you're using a primer pan, there's 2 ways to light the stove. You light it in the center and let the heat expand out. It takes about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes for the stove to bloom, to come up to full operating temperature. Or using a primer pan, you can put about 1/4 teaspoon of alcohol in the primer pan and then light that. If you're using a primer pan, you can set the pot directly on top of this unlit stove and light the primer pan. Then instead of waiting for 1 minute to 1.5 minutes for the stove to bloom before you put the pot on the stove, it only takes about 15 seconds or so to come up to speed. Because by using the primer pan, it's heating it from the outside in, so it heats it up faster. I don't have a windscreen around this. Obviously, we're inside, and the wind is not a factor. But one of the important things about an alcohol stove is it has to get hot in order to work. So one of the primary functions of a windscreen is not only to block the wind, but to reflect heat back onto the stove. Now you'll just notice that the flame on that stove settled down. While the fuel in the primer pan was still burning, the flame was a little bit wilder than normal. Once that primer pan fuel burned out, it goes back down to a nice normal, gentle flame. And it'll take about 5 minutes to boil 2 cups of water to a hard boil, and then it'll continue to boil for about 2.5 minutes beyond that. But getting back to the heat part and the windscreen, if you put a windscreen around this, it reflects heat back into it. And you hear a lot of people talk about alcohol stoves not performing well in cold weather. That's crazy. A well-made alcohol stove with a good heat-reflecting windscreen will operate, and it doesn't care what the temperature is.